Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this session, this panel inside the COGNIT Day today, 16th of December 2025. Today, at the end for this panel, what to do in this panel? Mainly, to see how open source can help, for this sovereignty idea. Here, Jordi Guijarro from Open Nebula Systems speaking, Principal Innovation here in Open Nebula. And let's go with important first for today. That these are our panelists out of the panel. I'm sure that you know COGNIT. During the last or the different sessions from this COGNIT Day, you see, the capabilities and all the features that the project is providing to the different partners contributing with software, extra capabilities, and at the end, technology, thinking in this digital sovereignty in Europe. From COGNIT at the end, framework that it builds this adaptive serverless, for the cognitive cloud edge continuum and to reach the challenges of the different use cases during this project they demonstrate. And following, of this, let's go with some introductions for today and for this panel. Let's start, from my left to right. At the beginning, from Thorsten from SUSE. Thorsten is now an innovation consultant and open source at SUSE. Is based in Germany. Hello, Thorsten. Welcome to this panel.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, let's continue with Johan Lineker from as a senior researcher at RISE, and is an assistant professor at the Land University based in Sweden. Hello and welcome, Johan.
Hello.
Hello. Let's continue in this case with Justina. She's an innovation director inside the European Digital SME Alliance, and she's based in Belgium. Welcome, Justina.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Very nice. And let's go with Pierre from OL2. He's the CEO, and he's based in France. Hello, Pierre. Okay, nice. Let's go with the main introductions for the different panelists and from the audience. The first, that we will have different blocks to cover, I think, some, I don't know if we can say controversial around the usage of open source and how open source can help, in digital sovereignty. But, we have some previous activities that, for instance, we have now the first cloud sovereignty framework provided by the Commission that at the end is based in a procurement process where the Commission, is trying to defining the criteria, for, try to measure this digital sovereignty. With this in mind and another actions from the policy side, like the Cyber Resilience Act that is impacting in the open source industry, or the Data Act around the cloud providers. Let's go with this first panel and the different panelists. We will go within this direction. First, Thorsten, Johan, Justina, and Pierre. And let's see this first block of questions. For the audience, for the panelists, we will have the different questions that we will work on during the session. And this is the first. At the end, we will try to define this concept of strategic autonomy, and when basically it comes to open source. And we have an additional question here, is that does Europe need a new open source governance model for projects that must be led by EU partners? We have here an example like COGNIT. Let's go with the first block. And here, Thorsten, please, what is your feeling here in these questions?
Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about the opinion and the view we as SUSE do have. I always struggle a little bit with the term autonomy because to me that's kind of let's say the absolute way of being independent, and this you can only achieve if you do everything yourself, right? And this is where I struggle a bit about it, because that really does not make sense to me. So I'm more asking, when I'm in conversations with customers or with public sector bodies, would you like to be more independent? So it's about that there can be different angles to sovereignty and to be on autonomy, but it's there is no white or no black, right? Because it's something in between. And I also like very much to give this into the context of, in the end, the discussion about this is nothing more than looking at risk management, right? So and open source can help here, for sure. I tend to say there's no sovereignty without open source, but open source is not the only aspect of sovereignty, right? It also comes into play, which is a little bit driving the discussion when you talk about procurement, this buy European thing. But in the end, I guess you have to look at what you are getting. Do you get open source? And also in open source, you can get into lock-in situations, because typically, as I said, if you do everything on your own, do it yourself model, then you have everything under control and you're completely independent. But if you go the way of, oh, I would like to have someone that helps me with that provides me a solution based on open source, then you have a contractual agreement, right? And you're in this way, you are dependent to this company, to this person, whatever kind of relationship you have there. And this is an important thing. And also, what I don't like about this term, as it sounds often very absolute, is if you look at it and you go this kind of by European way, I also hear sometimes the narration of, yes, the software, the open source software also needs to be made in Europe. And this does not work with open source, because open source is an international development model, right? And so we should be careful, if we look at this sovereign topic, to not hijack international structures. It's the other way around for me. Open source, the international open source model helps also to make sure and to be able to participate from Euro perspective. And if we find, for instance, a situation where we think we should do something just out of Europe, okay, that's fine. You know, I mean, you have the mechanic of forking stuff. So that also would give you the ability to take something that's internationally available in the open source community and further build upon it. But as always, there's also the bad side to it. If you create a fork, you have to do the maintenance for it. And that's the reason why I think we have to make sure, and also to the second question, it does not really make sense to me to say we need kind of a new governance, because there are ways available in the open source and development model that we can make sure that our interests are being seen. What I try always to say, go for an open source solution, and look that you have a European vendor, because then you are from outer factors that you can't impact and that you can't influence, is less than you going to some companies that provide open source solutions out of the US, for instance.
Okay, thanks, Thorsten. I really enjoy this risk management, you know, and this global idea. Let's continue in this case with Johan.
Yes, thanks. So now there's a risk this becomes like a boring panel, because I agree with most things, but not all what Thorsten just said. About I'll try to add some nuance. I mean, essentially, it's when people say sovereignty, digital sovereignty. You get this notion of building walls. It's not about building walls. I typically refer to this word label of open strategic autonomy. I believe some definition I've seen. It's about growing the ability to act autonomously and to freely choose your own solution, while reaping the benefits of collaboration with your partners. both locally and globally when possible. I mean, essentially, we're talking about avoiding vendor lock-in, about having control. Digital sovereignty is the vendor lock-in problem issue, but from a geopolitical point of view. It's nothing new to it. It's about having control of your dependencies. Open source is one means of having control. Requiring open standards is another way of having control. Ensuring that you have an exit strategy before you enter something, that you have control of ownership of the data, that you can get the data without having to pay 100,000 euros upfront just to download the data. I mean, these are basic requirements that you put into place to have control. Open source is one of these means to have control. So again, it's about realizing that open source is a tool to achieve various things, such as strategic autonomy or open strategic autonomy or digital sovereignty or vendor independence, or basically having control of your digital setup, your digital replica or the digital representation of society. That's what it's about, I would say, and then we need the capabilities. And regarding the second question, yes, don't reinvent the wheel. I mean, there are a lot of vehicles out there for engaging in collaboration, and when you see a need for setting up a new governance or a new foundation or whatever, do it. I mean, it's about just setting up a new collaboration, a new community, but it's also about people, organization, public sector need to understand to gain sovereignty. You need control. Control requires investments and contributions. Investments and contributions require capabilities. So it's about, if you want to drive influence open source, you need to build up the capabilities and invest. There's nothing saying that open source, because it's driven by some companies, you can't have a say or influence. I mean, invest in it and you will have this influence. That's how companies been working with open source for so far. Public sector governments need to realize this fact. And just to add some more nuance, as we're seeing public sector, I mean, there are basically public sector open source foundations all across Europe. In Denmark, there's the OS2 Foundation or association incorporating 80 plus out of 98 municipalities who collaborate, set up and host about 25 plus different open source projects. And we have similar foundations or associations or whatever vehicles across Europe. We can talk about IMBio in Belgium. We can talk about Agilakt in France. We can talk about OpenSeries in the Czech Republic. And we are seeing new of these collaborations emerging in Sweden as well, where there are the outset here is that the government entities, the public sector entities needs control because they are procuring. So they need to have a governance where they are in charge. But again, this is a balance because the suppliers also needs to be involved in the governance in some way because they are typically the ones delivering on it. So that's a delicate balance. But just to say that organizations, public sector already are setting up new governance or foundations or entities, communities when needed. So I don't see any issues with that. I mean, it's about being pragmatic.
Okay, nice. I think that appeared the second keyword is the vendor lock-in and collaboration. Yes, let's continue. In this case with Justina. Let's see your point of view in the matter.
Thank you very much, and thank you once again for having me. So I think it's needless to say open source is a powerful enabler of strategic autonomy, as we put it. And here I can agree also with Johan a lot. I like how you define it as strategic autonomy is about being in control of our dependencies. So open source helps there, good keyword to prevent vendor lock-in. Yes, of course, supports interoperability, and importantly for our community, it allows participation of any interested stakeholder in open and very fair terms. So SMEs and SME developer can participate in open source project, and that's a very important part for us in our community. However, there are some pitfalls. So I am probably the only one among the speakers today who is a big fan of open source community, but let's say I'm not a professional of open source community, so I'm not the full preacher of that. And what I see is that there are certain pitfalls in that, because having product that says based on open source in it, it doesn't mean that this is solution and that is fully European, that is somewhat supporting digital sovereignty. It could be that, but it's not necessarily like this, right? So we know very well that certain components can be open source, but as long as we are embedded into proprietary systems and platforms with closed management layers, APIs, pricing models, you name it, it can actually serve the other way around. So we need to be a bit cautious, perhaps once we go out of our open source community and speak with wider audience, with the same procurers, decision makers, is that one also needs certain skills, certain awareness to understand that just the name that something is open source is not immediately this magic wand that resolves all the problems, and there can still be other layers of dependency built around certain components that are open source. So I think it's easy for us in our community to understand, but it's not always that clear for people with maybe less understanding in that. And for this, we need, of course, also a bit of right skill set and right understanding to evaluate what are really interdependencies and what are the key elements in the project or the product. So having said this, I also do not think we need to reform the overall governance model. I think it is what it is, and the value of open source is exactly this openness and the model as it is today. However, I think that for certain projects that could be identified as of strategic importance for Europe, politically important, and especially those that are funded by public money, there could be a need of certain safeguards that could ensure that we really know who is behind developing certain projects or products. We need to also understand if European actors have access to this. And again, as Johan said very well, it's about investment. So support those players that we want to contribute to it and that we want to develop and sustain open source later on. So we really need to also make sure that the governance overall is kind of very transparent and we know who is in the decision making there and who is behind it.
Okay, nice. I think sure that complement something that really SMEs can participate. And from your alliance, not only can participate in open source, they can lead, all these. We have in Europe some examples. Okay, nice. Let's go with Pierre, to the end of this block, please.
Thank you. So concerning strategic autonomy or what sometimes people call sovereignty, it's the buzzword, but it's often used for the same meaning. I think that the most important is that countries master their digital infrastructure. And this was told in more military terms by the president of Huawei to the Chinese government a few years ago. He said that a country who does not master its digital infrastructure is like a country with no army. And I think it's true. But basically, if you don't master your infrastructure, you are at risk of becoming a kind of digital colony. And I mean to give the off switch to foreign countries, even if currently maybe it's a legend that Donald Trump may just shut down our infrastructure. I agree. But if, for example, some critical technologies, on some critical technologies, the Americans stop delivering security patches, how long do we stand? I mean, it's true for the cloud, for example, for all the cloud technologies that are sold by European telcos who just paint them blue and then state that they are sovereign. I mean, if the American providers stop delivering security patches, it won't work more than a few weeks or a few months. So I think that we have to master our technology, and that open source is what makes it possible. I mean, it's a prerequisite. It's not a guarantee that there will be no risk at all For example, a company who masters an open source project can maybe go bankrupt or make the project private. It has already happened. But in some cases, the projects are forked. There have been famous examples of that with, for example, Elasticsearch or Terraform. The projects are forked, or the companies are forced by the market to go back to open source. So it doesn't mean that it will always happen, but it makes it possible. And if the company, if the technology is proprietary, it's not, I mean, there's no guarantee that it's possible. So it's a prerequisite. It protects us against that kind of risk. Also, the company purchase is a high risk, because we can be sovereign with European companies providing proprietary software. It's possible. But when the technology or the company is purchased by a company from a foreign country, in France, we had a famous case with Mistral AI. They developed a famous LLM, and then the technology, it had been supported by public sector. The EC provided some calculation time and so on, because there was a promise of open sourcing the product at the end. But at the end, the product was sold to Microsoft. So in that case, we lost. We lost a product that had been partially funded by public money, on promises only engage people who listen to them. So we have to enforce open source as a prerequisite, particularly when there is some public funding behind. But also, I think that open models should be considered at large. I think someone already told that about open data and so on, open hardware, open protocols. I mean, open models is not just about software. On concerning the edge to cloud, because if I understand well, your project is also focused on edge to cloud. There is a part of it that we often forget, which is the smartphone. Here, I mean, this is our window to the world, and currently it is locked by two American actors, mostly in Europe, Apple and Google. So we also have to work on that. This phone is a Murena phone, so this one is de-Googlized, but it's complicated, and we still have issues to unlock the Play Store and to make all apps work. And so that's also important for our strategic autonomy. And I think that considering the whole picture, there is also something that is very important. It is lobbying, because currently foreign countries and organizations do a lot of lobbying at the European level. Of course, I'm thinking of large companies, but also of foundations like Linux Foundation, for example, who try to push technologies that are often deployed by telcos on proprietary American stacks. So they perfectly know what they do. The projects are open source, but they are deployed on proprietary IaaSes. And if it was not enough, they also took control of OpenStack recently. So I think that they have a kind of mastery of the whole stack. And we should not let even foreign foundations like that lobby and tell the EC what it should do. I mean, they are not European. So we also have to rely on European actors and stop listening to foreign actors who bring political interests with them and who try to influence the European policy. I think that I said most of.
No. Thanks. I think that it's clear at the end. Here we can connect the dots from the first, panelists from risk management, and these examples from Pierre. We have some examples. In this case, some of them business driven, another for another interest, another maybe for geopolitical. But at the end, I think that for this first block, we can, assume around all this conversation is that we need maybe not new, but an evolution of this open source governance model here in Europe. Not only, to evaluate the risk and to have, to ensure that all this public money at the end is impacting well, in the projects like COGNIT and others, because at the end, European is investing in innovation from, for our, not for our future, for our near future. And let's go with the next block, if you agree, because here is where if we have to have some evolution of the model, to continue being global, collaborative, and to try to be a reference or to be part of a reference project is this is the question about the infrastructure that some of you mentioned previously. We need something tangible in Europe. Why not, have to be all these code repositories has to be managed, and I don't know if we can say to control the life cycle of the code, not only, have this presence in Europe with this specific infrastructure for this open source development. I don't know. Let's see. And to play a game with you, panelists, we will change the order. Okay. And we will start, with Johan from RISE. What is your feeling about this specific action?
I mean, we're kind of seeing an evolution here in public sector where more and more governments are establishing their own collaboration platforms or social coding platforms. Germany has been leading with the opencode.de platform, which is communicate more as a concept now and being studied from different perspectives from the European Commission's OSPO network. The Netherlands are looking into 4Geo, I believe. And Sweden just came out with a report a couple of weeks ago promoting the idea of establishing its own national collaboration platform. And I mean, in some sense, it addresses a risk from government's perspective in that they are unsure what kind of data that they can share. So they see the code contributions as a form of data sharing, which it is to some sense. So they see a risk here. Are we allowed to, or are we not? So that's a barrier for collaboration from public side. And then there's also this perspective on, let's say, GitHub, for example. We've seen how it's been blocked off for certain countries historically wise. But then we can also talk about Git as a decentralized code collaboration or code versioning. It has a decentralized system, and we can also be pragmatic. We need to be where the developers are, and the developers are in certain places, but we maybe need to have resilience rather than moving away from what works. So we need to have alternatives to fall back to, and if I'm driving a community or part driving a community and one platform fails, then I will take that community and the Git and move it to another platform. And we need to have those platforms in place out of resiliency reasons, of course. So, I mean, again, it's about being pragmatic. Does the things work? Do we have the control? Do we have control of the situation? Can we move away if something doesn't work for us anymore? If we're not able to act per our needs. Let's say we have the new legislations coming with the CRA, which maybe will provide additional requirements which maybe are not met in other platforms. And then maybe we need to create our own, collaborate on our own. So again, my stance is we should be pragmatic, we should be resilient, and we need to have control of our situation. And we can do that in many ways.
Okay, nice. Portability appear, GitHub, some names, but let's go, with more the technological point of view with Torsten from SUSE. What is your opinion of this?
I 100% agree with Johan. That's I mean, the only thing that I see is that we could stimulate a little bit more in terms of building up alternatives, right? And now you can ask the question: does it make sense that every country starts to build their own kind of governmental GitHubs or GitLab instances, like in open code? I mean, yes, it is exactly this kind of uncertainty. What I'm allowed to do? Can I share stuff on GitHub? Yes, no. Whereby the open code platform is also giving kind of a little bit more help around that. So it's not only the GitLab instance that's incorporated to it. It also is driving kind of a marketplace to get awareness about what's available and so on and so forth. But in the end, I would say everything that's being developed should be on something that's more under our control in Europe. And this would then also stimulate kind of the marketplace for these kind of alternatives. There was one interesting thing, because Johan mentioned the open code thing. When it started to discuss in Germany the German stack, right? They were also starting to enforce or request that everything that's being developed and that's being used and as open source in the German stack should be in the open code platform, right? And I was thinking about, okay, what does this mean? This would also mean in the end, maybe it's just a not very clever phrasing. That might be the case. It was intended to be different, but it doesn't make sense. For instance, if you say, yes, I need to use a Linux operating system, so I need the kernel, and that we move away from GitHub the kernel, right? That doesn't really make sense. So yes, absolutely, be pragmatic. Try to stimulate that we have alternatives, and that we can, in case something happens that hits us and with regards to, for instance, GitHub, then that we have an alternative. But not in general to say it must. So because there's always a friction, and there is always kind of costs attached to it if you just do it for the sake of yes, we have to do, right? Offer it, that we have alternatives, and then everything is fine from my perspective.
Okay, nice. And let's see, after all this, for who is now managing these, repositories, in this case, from Pierre, what is your, here, your vision?
Sorry, I was muted. Concerning platforms like GitHub, for example, of course, we have that issue. It's clear, and I fully support what the others have said about that. What I'm not sure about, and some don't seem to be sure as well, is that we need something as centralized as GitHub can be in the American area, or as Gitee can be in China, because they have an alternative in China called Gitee, which is their main Git platform. But if we do that, it's fine, and it could be handled by a public sector, and probably it's the only way to do it if we really want to implement that. But the issue is that if we do it this way, we still have a single platform, or a main platform, so we still have a kind of single point of failure, even if it's European. I mean, we have seen recently what happens when the internet breaks its main pattern, which is distribution, decentralization, and interoperability. We have seen what happened with outages from Cloudflare and Amazon last year, for example, or later or before from Microsoft. So when there are outages on centralized services that are used by millions of people, the internet just does not work anymore. So we also need to look at decentralization and interoperability as strong patterns toward toward autonomy on digital infrastructure, because it's not just other countries threatening us. It can also fail. I mean, we need to mitigate the risk of outage and crashes of the infrastructure. So for that, there are also, I think we can also think about federation and interoperability, like the Fediverse does, for example. It is also possible to do some Forge federation. So I'm not saying that everyone should have his own Forge at home, but I'm not sure it's really an issue if individual countries have their own, and they can try to make them interoperate and talk together, I think. So that's my main point about the infrastructure on the way it should be designed.
Okay, thanks, Pierre, because the federation word appeared in some the projects they are working in the idea at different levels, and here with the last panelist for this blog, in this case Justina, and maybe as a end user of this possible common infrastructure, federated or not, for SMEs, what is your impression, that it's only code, or we are thinking some additional services?
I would say there was important keyword as well, which was autonomy of infrastructure. So I think we need to really look holistically at this. So it's not only about the place where I come and I input my open source project and my code. I think it's very, very important to see who and what is behind on all different layers and of technology. Because if we think of GitHub, for example, I would say one of the biggest problems are these other layers to which it is linked, but it runs on AWS, it uses maybe Azure pipelines, Google Cloud Build, whatever it is. So I think it's very, very important from our perspective is that the alternative, whatever it would be, our European alternative would keep these things in mind and would look at all the layers that are needed for these type of platforms to work. Then, of course, I did not know that there are different member country level platforms already being developed. And I do think that this can stay both federated on European level, or there might be individual ones. But what is important is that indeed we have this level that allows us open APIs, CI/CD pipelines to be open, so that we can easily integrate and migrate between them. So that also kind of creates a federation. And that is definitely very important, because we cannot create things on isolated level somewhere in one state or not another. Because the strength also is the collaboration. This is what SMEs need, to collaborate. One SME cannot develop a massive open source project, right? We have good front runners, but we need to work in collaboration. And for that, we need to be able also to move easily between the systems as well, because we also might want to create projects that serve different governments, create products that is not for one specific client. And for that, we definitely also need this type of interoperability between the platforms as well.
Okay, thanks, Justina, for this. At the end, maybe the main driver that I thinking with all your information that you provide is that resilience can be an enabler, a driver to at the end go with this model. And checking the time, we only have 9 minutes, okay, to end this panel. And we have a specific last block with one question, because at the end we have to be with a concrete action. Okay, in your opinion, what is the main action from the EU should take in order to support open source in Europe? Please, 1 minute by panelist for this, to be concrete. And let's go with some ideas, for the audience, and maybe who is making policies in Europe. Let's go. We will, start with the first order of the first block. Please, Torsten from SUSE.
Okay. Yeah, for me, this is something that's very much driven around procurement. So there should be an open source first policy from my perspective, because that would give a little bit kind of the challenge to look into the market, what's available as open source. And if you also, as the public sector is asking for and sharing the requirements of solutions they need to have in place, and even if there's something not available, this is kind of, if you ask for it, because we have in Europe a very strong open source ecosystem. And we just saw by statistics from GitHub that regarding contributions on their platform, we are far beyond the US. We can do open source. We can do software coding. So believe in that, and not only, I mean, it does not help if you say, yes, open source is great, helps us to get independent, but in the end, you are buying, again, proprietary solutions. That's not helping anywhere. So for me, it's really kind of make the demand, have an open source first policy, and attach to it also, if it's not a cloud service that you are going to procure, use the sovereign cloud framework that has been defined, because it's a very good one. And it also helps, for instance, if you look for software technologies. And also one thing I would like to drive is really requirements. Don't put in a specific technology you would like to use. Define what you need to have, and then the market will put something together as open source. But the requirement needs also to be, it must be open source, right? Because from the Free Software Foundation, the Europe Free Software Foundation, public money, public code, that's the way to go. That's also our understanding from SUSE.
Okay, thanks, Torsten. With these last ideas, let's, reminder, 1 minute, please. Let's continue, in this case, with Johan.
Finally, some disagreements. No, but I definitely agree with Torsten on like procurement. We need to, public sector needs help. They need support. We need to create demand and supply. The Eurostack has some good principles with buy European, sell European, promote European, or invest European. There are some good aspects there from a pragmatic perspective, not like the fundamental perspectives. But I would rather say than open source first. I would say control first. There needs to be like a minimum bar in that we need to have control. You can gain control by many things. You can gain control by defining that all the interfaces and APIs are open or openly standardized, that you could switch out one legabit by another. Ensure that you have ownership of the data, that you can move the data unrestricted from one place to the other, that you have resiliency, that you require the vendor to provide you with an exit strategy, or that you define an exit strategy, that you have the budget for this, that you consider not just the software, but also how you gain the software, so also the cloud services. So there is a holistic need for support in terms of regaining control of your software, of your digital infrastructure. One part of the solution is open source, but always open source is not always the solution. But we need to gain control.
Okay, thanks, Johan. Let's go with Justina.
I think maybe a bit different perspective, because I don't want to be repetitive, while I very much support the points that both of the speakers made before me. I think what could help here is that there would be an understanding of decision makers that open source is also a critical digital infrastructure. With that understanding, there also comes ideas and investment into greater control. There comes investment into long-term maintenance, into looking at the governance, and also encouraging adoption, and importantly, contribution by different types of stakeholders, including SMEs. So with recognition in the mindset that this is a digital critical infrastructure, I think that could help to enhance the next steps.
Okay, thanks, to maintain the time and to be very concrete. And let's go with Pierre.
Yes, on the first of all, I fully agree on what Torsten has said, so I won't repeat it. I'm completely in line with that. So instead of repeating it, I will try to say something different and take the problem also the other way around. We have been involved also with the NLNet Foundation in a European program called NGI, Next Generation Internet. And probably you know that this program funds existing open source projects. It organizes open calls, and it's very easy to apply. On the people, the projects can obtain some grants, some small grants, but this is very helpful for small or medium projects. And there are many very, very useful projects in terms of infrastructure. It can be very small ones, small components that are critical in the internet tool chain, but it can also be digital commons. Some have been funded, like OpenStreetMap or Mastodon, for example. So also some security bricks like Tor, like WireGuard. And so there have been very important bricks that have been funded like that. And if you look at your SBOM, at the software that you include in your stack when you deliver and develop something, it is about 80% of the components that come from individuals or from very, very small teams. So I should say that what we must do if we want to nurture the ecosystem and maintain the creativity and the innovation is feeding the monkeys and developing that kind of initiative, and also involving even in horizon projects. There is because the system behind, they call that FSTP. It is a kind of cascade funding mechanism. It can be generalized to all horizon projects. Why not? Because it's a way to involve also SMEs on small structures that usually are not able to set up or even to join a Horizon consortium. So we also need that public money nurtures the ecosystem. And currently, this works. It has proven efficient with NGI, but it also could be extended to infrastructure maintenance. For example, for digital commons, we have critical needs of servers, sysadmins, to maintain all that infrastructure up and running. And currently, we have nothing to sustain that, or almost. So we also need to extend that kind of initiatives to nurturing not only innovation, but also maintenance of our commons.
Okay, thanks, Pierre. As a conclusion, I think that we can be very happy, about all these ideas that the decision makers, can adopt. We have this procurement and investment, importance, mainly for the public sector. We have this control first through interoperability. Why not? We have all these ideas allow the cascade funding for open calls from the Horizon Europe projects or another innovation projects in Europe. And I think that from the session, thanks for all your collaborations, like we are doing in open source. We have the same aim, not in this panel. I'm very happy, to be here today, and thanks, for the COGNIT project and this COGNIT Day, to transmit all these, ideas, conclusions, and knowledge to the audience. See you in the next session, and thanks everyone to being here today.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.